Former President Donald Trump is once again topping this week's edition of Political Update headlines here from our Midtown Atlanta studios. I'm Tim Darnell. Welcome to this week's edition of Political Update. Again, former President Donald Trump has once again failed in his attempt to quash a special grand jury report and investigation into his alleged 2020 election interference here in Fulton County and here in Georgia. Late Monday afternoon, the Georgia Supreme Court issued a ruling that denied a petition from the former president and his attorneys to not only quash the release of the special grand jury report, but also to prohibit Fulton County District Attorney Fonnie Willis from any further investigation. We are, of course, waiting from now until perhaps all the way through early to mid-September on whether or not Fulton County DA Willis will indeed announce charges and indictments against the former president or any of his Republican allies for, again, their alleged efforts to impact the outcome of Georgia's 2020 presidential election, an election that saw Joe Biden narrowly win Georgia, becoming the first Democrat to win Georgia in a presidential election since Bill Clinton in 1992. Also on Monday, U.S. Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona was in Atlanta at Agnes Scott College, and he hinted at the possibility of more student loan relief coming for American borrowers. Cardona's appearance came a few days after the Biden administration announced a plan to forgive the debts of around 800,000 borrowers, totaling about $39 billion in relief. Cardona did not go into any specific details, but he did say the U.S. Supreme Court, quote unquote, got it wrong when it struck down Biden's original plan earlier this year.
The goal is to be able to pay what you can afford, because right now people are falling into default because the college loan payments are too high for the salaries. Clearly, we're not done fighting for the borrowers. We're not done fighting for accessible higher education, and that's something that we're going to be committed to.
Speaking of the administration, former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms is returning to the White House. The 60th mayor of Atlanta will serve on President Biden's Export Council. The former Atlanta mayor previously served as a senior advisor for the president until she stepped down earlier this year. And also here in Atlanta, last week's announcement from State Representative Misha Maynor that she is switching to the Republican Party continues to send major political shockwaves throughout the state. With her switch, Maynor now becomes the first black female Republican to serve in the Georgia General Assembly. Her district centers around West Atlanta's and one of the most reliably Democratic voting districts in Metro Atlanta, and it remains to be seen what kind of challengers she will draw when and if she runs for re-election next year in 2024. Social media continues to play a large role in the nation's political discourse, and Threads, which is the newest social media platform announced very recently, immediately made headlines. I recently had a conversation with David Schweidel, a professor of marketing at Emory University, on the possible impact of this new internet digital town hall and platform on the nation's political conversation, as well as its possible impacts on the 2024 presidential election. Here's that interview. David Schweidel, Goizeta Business School professor and a social media expert. What is Threads? What is it all about? And just how did this whole new social media app get started?
So think of Threads as really a competitor to Twitter. Over the last year or so, since Elon Musk had taken over at Twitter, you had seen a lot of policy changes being made there that led to a number of people deciding to leave that platform. One of the early benefits of people deciding to leave Twitter was a platform called Mastodon that some people chose to sign up for. Threads is Meta's entry into this competition. So very similar to Twitter, primarily a text-driven platform. A key differentiator, though, being you can sign in with your Instagram account. So what Meta's tapping into is that large existing user base already to say, hey, you don't have to you don't need to create a new account. You don't need to create a new password. You can sign in with your existing credentials, and we'll even make it easy for you to follow people on threads that you're already connected to on Instagram.
Meta's active user base is approximately 2 billion Instagram users. Is that number correct?
That sounds about right.
Twitter's has an active user base of 250 million. So just by sheer numbers, you would think that Threads and Meta kind of has a leg up on Twitter, even though it's only been active for a few days.
Right, and I mean, it's the fastest downloaded app. You know, the first numbers I saw were 30 million signups. I just saw new numbers today at 70 million. So definitely from an adoption standpoint, Meta is going to have a leg up here. The real question is going to be how many of those people that are signing up now are actually going to stick with it. You know, you think about all the apps that you've got on your phone. How many do you use on a regular basis? You know, for most of us, it's probably a handful, maybe 10 or so apps. And so is Threads going to enter into that set that you really use frequently? That's the hope, because we've got to keep in mind, this is, from a business standpoint, this is all about advertising dollars. Will Threads allow Meta to get more engagement with the consumer? Will they be able to make more advertising revenue off of users? And that's the part that it's a little bit too early for us to kind of make that claim. Because if you think about Instagram, it's a visual-driven platform. That's different from Threads. It's a text-driven platform. Big difference between those two. Another difference is around who you're choosing to connect with. You know, Instagram, like Facebook, you're kind of having this closed network of people that you're connecting to. You're choosing who you want to follow, but by and large, most people choose to maintain relatively tight privacy settings on Facebook and Instagram. Twitter, you know, one of the early social media entrants was the default public square, right? Things, unless you took action otherwise, the default was that your posts are going to be public. It's why we see in the media so much reporting about what people say on Twitter, because the public can actually see that. Whereas something that's said on Facebook, something that's posted on Instagram, unless you're connected to that individual, you're not going to be able to see it unless they choose to make it public. So it's, on the one hand, it seems leveraging that existing user base, you know, that 2 billion users, seems like a no-brainer. We're going to have to see how it shakes out if those users really want to embrace a tool that's different in many important respects from what Twitter was. I think the other piece is, you know, how much time do you want to spend on social media? Right? You know, are you going to say, okay, I'm going to spend an additional 10, 15 minutes a day on Threads? Or is that 10, 15 minutes going to come out of what you were doing on Facebook, what you were doing on Instagram? So from a profit standpoint, Meta is going to count on getting more usage net. They're willing to trade a little bit, but they don't want to just say, okay, I've got an hour less engagement on Instagram and I've got an hour more engagement on Threads. That's a wash. What they're looking for is to grow the amount of engagement they're getting with consumers.
And let's talk about that measuring standard of success. What do you think Mark Zuckerberg and Meta are hoping to achieve with Threads? Do you think they have a specific dollar amount in mind, or a specific number of users in mind over a 6 month, year, 5 year time frame? What's their standard, their measuring stick?
I mean, I think a net increase in minutes spent on Meta-owned properties is what they're looking for, right? And initially, they might say, okay, well, we're willing to, we might see a little bit of kind of fluctuation on Facebook, Instagram, as people kind of establish a new routine with threads. But this is all coming down to advertising. And so the way that we should be looking at this is, here's how much I can make on advertising off of my existing properties. I'm creating a new property. How much, what is my net increase in advertising revenue? Typically visual or video driven ads perform much better. It's why you see, why there's a lot of interest in TikTok, why there's always been interest in Instagram. So I don't know how much they're going to be able to command for advertising dollars on Threads being primarily a text-driven platform. So how that's going to shake out is what we should be paying attention to.
This is obviously another social media challenger to Twitter. Donald Trump, possibly presumptive at this point in time. A lot of things can change. Presumptive 2024 GOP nominee if he continues leading in the poll. Obviously, he was removed from Twitter several years ago. Elon Musk purchases the platform and he's back, but at the same time, he's launched his Truth Social social media platform. As we enter into the 2024 election, what do you envision Threads as becoming, or what role will it play? You said a moment ago yourself, Twitter has been almost the default public town square for discussion.
Right.
What role do you think Threads is going to play over the next year and over the next election cycle?
Social media and politics got inherently linked together. Donald Trump didn't do this. I mean, we can go back to Barack Obama running a digital heavy campaign. So this is nothing new. We're going to have a new entrant actually in the mix with Threads. You've got Truth Social, as you had mentioned, that's potentially going to play a role in this. The piece that intrigues me about Twitter versus Threads from a political standpoint, I'll go back to what I mentioned about kind of that public versus private network. When you are exposed to information coming from lots of different people, you don't worry so much about the echo chambers that can develop. And it's those echo chambers that really fuel misinformation being spread. I worry about that a little bit more with Threads because we're tapping into those existing connections from Instagram. And so if I've got this closed network of people that I'm being exposed to information from, it's got the potential to fuel the extent to which people are exposed to and start to believe misinformation. All right. Whereas with Twitter, most people, you choose the followers that you want to be exposed to. So we don't have a whole lot of left-right crossover. If you're a hardcore liberal, you're following hardcore liberal voices. If you're a conservative, you're following conservative voices. But you do have some crossover in those respects. With Threads, at least my impression of what I've read so far is that because of the way your network is being constructed, I would worry about that exacerbating kind of the misinformation challenges that we already know are going to be problematic.
Is there room out there in the infinite digital universe for another social media app like Threads, or is that really just going to play itself out and we'll see, over the next coming weeks, months, years? And there are so many ways we interact with this miraculous little device. But is there really a need, from your perspective as a social media expert, for a Threads?
you've got 24 hours in a day for the consumer. That's what everyone's competing for. Right now, take out the amount that we sleep, the amount that we're presumably working, you're probably competing for something on the order of, let's call it 10 to 14 hours. Let's be conservative and say maybe we're only competing for at most 8 hours worth of attention. That's social media, that's publishers, digital and traditional publishers, that's television content. There's only so much attention that people have that they're willing to give. I really struggle to see the need for another entrant into the social media space. I mean, if we think about what was the last entrant that really made a meaningful splash, and has persisted, was TikTok, right? And this was a fundamentally different format. And so if we look at kind of the genesis of social media, right, we had Twitter, we had Facebook that were initially very text heavy. Then we've got Instagram, which is more visual heavy. Now I've got short form video format, which is the basis for TikTok. In some respects, this almost seems like a play for saying, hey, well, Twitter's having some struggles right now, and we think we can unseat them and gain the market share that they had. And yeah, I'll be honest, as much as we talk about Twitter, the reason we talk about Twitter is because it's public. It's because that's the information that we're able to get. If you look at the academic research that's been done, or if you use, for companies that are using social listening platforms, 80+% of the data that populates those platforms comes from Twitter because it's public data. But I'm not sure, it's certainly been relevant as part of the public discourse, but you take away that public component, I'm not sure how relevant Threads is going to be to the public discourse. I don't know if it's going to be able to kind of capture the attention that Twitter was able to capture by being kind of that open format.
Well, the social media world and marketplace of ideas is obviously going to continue to play a role socially and politically and across all population areas and stratospheres, and it's something that we'll continue to cover here on Atlanta News First, thanks to David Schweidel. He is a Goizueta Business School professor here at Emory University in Atlanta and a social media expert. Thanks to him for sharing his thoughts on Threads, and thanks to all of you for watching this edition of Political Update here on Atlanta News First.